My name is Tara Curtis, and I lead our transportation policy team, which advises the Commission on policy matters and implements programs related to transportation network companies, autonomous vehicles, and other emerging passenger transportation services. And I'm joined by Anna Ju, who is our lead analyst implementing the TNC Access for All program, and who will be facilitating today's workshop. So in a few moments, I'd like to introduce assigned Commissioner Shiroma to provide opening remarks. But first, I want to cover some meeting logistics and the agenda for our workshop. Next slide, please. So the purpose of today's workshop is to discuss Track 5B issues in this proceeding and for everyone in the workshop to gain a better understanding of each other's proposals. We appreciate you keeping the discussion focused on Track 5B issues, and these include issues related to data collection, community outreach to the disability community, multi-county pooling of funds, and the delegation of staff authority once the proceeding closes. We ask that you please save questions for the end of your presentations or type them into the chat box, which staff will monitor throughout the day. You may also raise your hand to request to unmute to speak during Q&A or open discussion and public comment periods. And to raise your hand, you should find a hand icon in the lower bar of your WebEx window. So we recognize that while these are helpful features, if you have a challenge using any of them, please email us at tncaccess@cpuc.ca.gov during the workshop if you need assistance. We'll be monitoring that as well. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this workshop is being recorded, and the recording will be posted alongside any meeting materials online a few days after the meeting. Closed captioning is also available by clicking the CC icon in the lower left of your WebEx screen. And lastly, if you have any questions after the workshop, you can also use that tncaccess@cpuc.ca.gov email address. Next slide. So this morning's agenda will cover staff proposals on Track 5B issues, followed by presentations by Lyft, Uber, Disability Rights California, and San Francisco. We'll also have an opportunity for public comment following those presentations at around 10 a.m., after which we plan to have a short break. And if public comment ends early, we'll take a break and reconvene for a series of up to 30-minute discussion sessions organized around each of the Track 5B issues. First, among those, we'll discuss the scoped questions and proposals on TNC data collection. That will be followed by a discussion of the community outreach requirements of the program. And we do intend to take an hour-long lunch break around 11:45, reconvening at 12:45 to discuss the final two items, which are the multi-county pooling of funds and staff delegation. We'll end no later than 2 p.m. and may adjust the agenda timings as the day goes to make the most of everybody's time. So thank you again for being here today and contributing to a robust dialogue in implementing the TNC Access for All program. And now I'd like to turn it over to Commissioner Shiroma for some opening remarks. Commissioner?
Yes, thank you, Tara. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending today's workshop. We've seen in the annual benchmark report, which was published recently, that this program is growing and evolving. We saw that response times have improved over time in 11 of the 18 total reported counties, and that ride volumes appear to be recovering from the lower numbers that we've seen during the pandemic. Accordingly, this is an opportune time to refine our data collection, community outreach strategies, and process to pool funding amongst counties. I look forward to hearing the presentations and discussions as we explore these issues today. Thank you, and back to you, Tara.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I will turn it to Anna to walk us through CPD staff's proposal on Track 5B.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Ju, and I will be presenting on CPED's staff proposal. So before I go over staff's proposal, there may be participants who may not have access to a computer or the slides in front of them. So we'll do our best to read out the questions. So CPED submitted comments on all the questions raised in track 5B. Specifically, CPED staff addressed the topics listed on this slide, which are Tnc Data Collection, Tnc Community Outreach, multi-county pooling of funds, and Commission Staff Authority Delegation. So the first question on data collection, I'm on page 7, reads, what additional data should be collected from TNCs and access providers to inform the 2024 legislative report and potential modifications to the wave time benchmarks? How can this data collection advance the goals of the Commission's Environmental and Social Justice Action Plan? Getting tongue twisted. In the proceedings, track 4, Commission required TNCs to report a list of counties in which it operates wave service in a given quarter, regardless whether it seeks an offset in that county. So although the Commission did not adopt additional data reporting requirements, the Commission recognizes additional data may be considered to inform the 2024 legislative report. Commission staff takes the position to require TNCs to provide the unique number of waves in operation, including those that serve pre-scheduled and real-time requests by hour of the day and day of the week, regardless of whether an offset was requested for that county. Currently, TNCs report aggregated number of waves in operation, which is not useful in identifying the number of waves available at certain times of the day. CPED staff believes by providing the unique number of waves will help to evaluate concerns about stranded wave customers and whether customers lack access to waves at certain times of the day. In addition, as mentioned in CPED's track 4 staff proposal, CPED staff maintains its position to require TNCs to report total wave trips requested and completed broken out by county, zip code, and type of service, whether they're pre-scheduled wave and or real-time wave service, regardless of whether an offset was requested for that county. CPED staff believes with zip code level data will help further identify wave demand and availability within each county, and will also help assess where and for whom wave availability improvements are needed within each county. Lastly, CPED staff proposed that complaints related to pickup and drop-off shall be added as additional categories reported separately from other to assess the magnitude of these complaints. Currently, it's a challenge to quantify the frequency of the pickup and drop-off complaints. So this next question on TNC community outreach on slide 8 reads, how should the Commission ensure that TNCs undertake effective engagement with the disability communities to further acceptance and expansion of on-demand wave service? So in the proceedings track 4, in the discussion on community outreach, the Commission recognized parties' concerns throughout this proceeding about the level and quality of TNC's engagement with the disability community. CPD declines to provide a specific proposal, but instead puts forth these guidelines principles listed here that the engagement should incentivize TNCs to increase awareness of wave ride options and provide an effective feedback loop from wave customers to TNCs. The engagement should provide clear, consistent requirements for TNCs that seek offset or exemptions, and provide clear qualitative and quantitative requirements that can easily be assessed by CPD staff when reviewing advice letters. We look forward to a discussion about this during the open discussion portion of the agenda and hearing from entities and organizations that advocates for Californians with disabilities whom we believe are in better position to provide a framework. Therefore, we look forward to robust dialogue during the open discussion portion of the agenda. The next question on slide 9 on the issue of multi-county pooling of funds reads, for counties where the amount of Access Fund money available is relatively small, should Access Fund monies be permitted to be pooled across multiple counties? If so, what criteria should be used to determine multi-county pooling? What other requirements should be considered? Should the Commission allow fund pooling only in counties served by the statewide fund administrator, only in counties served by individual local Access Fund administrator, or both? CPD takes the position to allow pooling of funds, and in addition to further increase wave service, is to allow transit agencies to serve as local Access Fund administrator, or LAFA, if an MPO, RTPA, or CTC does not apply as LAFA. CPD believes transit agencies already have the necessary expertise and knowledge of accessibility needs in their county. If, however, overlapping eligible entities apply in that same county, the MPO will be given preferential consideration, followed by the county level RTPA or CTC, and then a public transit agency. Again, CPD reiterates the importance of allowing pooling of funds across multiple counties to further advance the goals of the statute to increase wave service. CPD believes wave service should not be neglected in counties where there's little to no funding available. Instead, permit the Access Fund administrators to shift available Access Fund monies to counties with insufficient funds so that a wave program can be developed in these counties, if so desired. CPD puts forth the following conditions: to allow MPOs, RTPAs, and CTCs to pool across multiple counties outside their jurisdiction, an MOU must be signed to all involved agreeing to the pooling of funds, and the MPOs, RTPA, CTC will be the ones to determine how much should be allocated between the counties. For the statewide Access Fund administrator, they too will determine how much funding shall be allocated between counties, and the SAFA, which is the statewide Access Fund administrator, will be required to conduct engagement with disability communities and with the help of transit planning agencies to identify where wave is needed. And then finally, the Access Fund administrators will be required to track these expenses broken down by county, by quarter, along with the other reporting requirements set forth in prior decisions. So slide 11 on the issue of Commission staff authority delegation. For those who haven't been following the proceeding, this proceeding is set to close in February of 2023, while the Access for All Act program sunsets on January 1st, 2026, pursuant to SB 1376. Accordingly, the Commission included the following scoping questions, which reads: should Commission staff be delegated authority to make decisions on certain aspects of the Access for All program once the proceeding has closed? If so, which issues? Commission staff take the position for all issues related to development and implementation of Access Fund administrators, which include Access Fund disbursement, all things Access Fund administrator and access provider reporting requirements, modifying the LAFA and access provider schedule, including deadlines of application submittals, posting of notice of funding availability, reporting requirements, and also all things related to Access Fund administrator and access provider application process, which are already handled by CPED. The staff be delegated authority to make those decisions. In addition, CPD staff recommends staff be delegated authority to make modifications to the quarterly access fee statements, as well as grant extensions if needed. And finally, CPED already has the authority over the advice letter process, including modification of templates associated with offset and exemptions. CPED staff shall have discretion to make decision relating to the format of advice letters consistent with GO 96B. This concludes staff's proposal. Okay, so I will now move on to the next agenda item to allow parties to make a short presentation of their proposals on the Track 5B issues. So the list of presenters in order are the following: Lyft, Uber, Disability Rights California, and then San Francisco. We're allowing approximately 10 minutes, but since we're a little ahead of schedule, if you go over, it's okay. Before you begin your presentation, please identify yourself and your position with the company. For others who may have questions or clarifications of the proposals being presented, go ahead and jot them down, as you'll have an opportunity to ask for clarifications during our open discussion portion of the agenda. So we'll first start with Lyft.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning. My name is Janae Weaver, Regulatory Compliance Counsel at Lyft. I am joined today by Daniel Rocky, partner at Bryan Cave. He is also Lyft's outside counsel that will be commenting during today's session. And with that, the next slide, please. During my presentation, I want to focus on question 1 that was asking whether or not TNC should be required to provide additional data to support the Commission's legislative report. During my presentation, I will review the report requirements, the data that TNCs are currently submitting, as well as Lyft's recommendation. Next slide. Next slide. The legislative report required under Senate Bill 1376 requires the Commission to submit a report that consists of a study on the demand for waves, including the demand according to time of day and geographic area. The report should also include an analysis of the reports required to be submitted by access providers receiving funding, the availability of unallocated funds in the Access Fund, including the need to reassess Access Fund allocations, and an analysis of current program capabilities and deficiencies, and recommendations to overcome any identified deficiencies. Next slide, please. So now I want to briefly go over the data that TNCs and access providers are currently submitting. Next slide. So within our quarterly reports, we are providing the number of waves that are available to receive a trip. This data can provide information on the number of vehicles available on the platform and can also speak to the program's demand. We also include data on wave trips as a whole, including data regarding the number of trips completed during the quarter, that were not accepted, that had a no-show, that were canceled by a passenger or a driver, as well as unique trips. This trip data, when considered as a whole, provides insight into the program's demand An individual can also determine completion ratios by analyzing the trip data. We also include information about our response times. The raw data can be analyzed to determine wait times a rider experiences for a wave trip, and this also speaks to the effectiveness of the program. Next slide, please. We also provide the percentage of all rides completed within the required estimated time of arrival. This provides key information on the rider's experience. We also report the trip completion standard, which is an aggregated number of completed trips by county, and this informs of how many trips were completed over the quarter period. We also provide a breakdown of funds expended by specific category. This provides an overview of the total cost of the program. We also provide information when we are seeking an exemption in regards to the exemption response time, which is a percentage of all rides completed within the required ETA, which again speaks to the rider experience. Next slide. And then we also provide information on training and inspection that occurs during the quarter. This provides insight into how the program is growing over time. An individual will be able to determine the number of new waves that have been inspected and the number of new wave drivers that have received training. We also provide information on our outreach efforts completed during the quarter. This informs what geographic areas were targeted, as well as the marketing materials that were used. We then give an overview of all of the complaints that were filed under the WAVE program, and these complaints are classified as either having to pertain to securement issues, driving training, vehicle safety, service animal, or other. And again, this is key information that provides what the rider experience has been. Next slide. And next slide. And so due to all of this information that we're currently providing on a quarterly basis, we feel that this information, when analyzed, provides an overview of the program that will then provide the necessary information for the Commission to develop their legislative report and to be able to speak for the demand of the WAVE program, as well as the program's current capabilities, as well as its deficiencies, and be able to draw recommendations as needed. And that concludes our presentation.
Thanks, Janae. So next we'll move on to Ubers.
Anna, let me jump in just for 1 second before Uber starts, just to remind everyone, we'll have a chance to ask follow-up questions and seek clarification during the discussion periods on each of the scoping memo items. So if you have questions, keep track of them. We'll have plenty of opportunity to talk through those.
Awesome. Well, if it's all right, Anna, I can kick things off really quick. Good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Bierman. I'm Regulatory Counsel at Uber. Uber's grateful to participate in today's workshop. I just want to note we don't have a formal presentation of the proposals that we submitted a couple weeks ago. I did, however, want to give a couple new members of our team the opportunity to introduce themselves to the Access for All stakeholders. We're excited to have them on board and engaging in this work stream. So with that, I'll kick it over to Seth and Michael to quickly introduce themselves.
Thank you, Adam. Good morning, everyone. My name is Seth Smith. I'm manager for public policy at Uber for California, specifically focused on Northern California and state agencies. So I'll be working with staff there at the CPUC periodically, I imagine, in the near future and ongoing. A little bit about me. I'm a veteran of the U.S. Navy. Spent 6 years as a cryptologist and translator deployed to the Middle East for several years. Graduate of UCLA. I'm a California native, born and raised in Fresno. Grew up working on a grape farm. My family still owns the farm. We make raisins. Third generation farmer. And very excited to be joining the team at Uber and very excited to be working on this Access for All program and our Way of Transportation program, especially having come from working in Veterans Affairs issues for several years and working as a veterans advocate. I'm very familiar with issues related to people with disabilities and issues related to transportation around that. And so excited to have an opportunity to have an impact on that here in California. Michael?
Hey, thank you, Seth. Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Tejan. I joined Uber at the end of February, and I'm based out of the Washington, D.C. office. I am the Wave program manager on the central operations team. So I work solely on the Uber Wave products. I'm managing product performance and looking at how we become more efficient and increase utilization. I do a lot of work with our fleet partners and our rental partners that support our program. And as I get ramped up, I'll be looking at efforts to focus on improving access to Wave vehicles on the platform, and also coordinate internally with my colleagues on Wave and accessibility issues. By way of background, I worked for the local government here in Washington, D.C., in the D.C. Department of For-Hire Vehicles, which is the regulator of taxis and ride sharing in the District of Columbia. Among many things I did there, I did a lot of work on accessibility, including Wave vehicles, including programming and policy and compliance. Managed a program where we use the city's taxi fleet to provide a paratransit alternative for DC residents. It was very, very successful, gave 250,000 rides a year before the pandemic. Did a lot of work around various financial and non-financial incentives for Wave operators, and did a lot of compliance work ensuring our taxi companies were compliant with fleet requirements, and did a lot of field testing and other work around Wave vehicles and the taxi fleet. So I'm excited to be here and looking forward to joining the meeting today.
Great, thank you both. Looking forward to working with you. Adam, is that it for Uber's presentation?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
But we'll be here all day, and we're looking forward to digging into the issues.
Great, thank you. So I'll now move on to, San Francisco's presentation. I believe Erin, Erin, are you on?
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Sorry, I thought we were last. I'm ready.
Oh, sorry, I meant disability. That's right. Sorry, I just saw the slide next to Uber's. Right, so the next one would be Disability Rights California. So Autumn, Melissa.
Hi, good morning, and welcome Seth and Michael to these proceedings. I'm Autumn Elliott from Disability Rights California. We're the state protection and advocacy system for the entire state. And we're going to focus our presentation on outreach issues because it's a critical one for the folks that we represent, and also an area where we have a lot to contribute. Outreach is critical, a critical part of this process. One, because it's a necessary remedial step. We wouldn't need it if the services had been accessible from the beginning, but they weren't. And so for years and years, what folks with disabilities have understood about the transportation network companies is that they're not accessible, and that if you use a wheelchair, you shouldn't bother calling because you're not going to get service. And so in order to overcome what folks with disabilities have learned about these services, it's critical that there be robust and widespread outreach. And then the second reason it's critical is that a large part of the program set forward by the statute is the collection of data to see how well the program is meeting the need, and that data is going to get skewed and be meaningless if outreach is unsuccessful and people with disabilities don't know that this service exists and so aren't even requesting the rides. And our experience is showing that people still don't know that this program exists and that the TNCs are actually providing the services. Just last week, Disability Rights California was contacted by a disability organization in Alameda County, and they said, hey, we're aware that Disability Rights California is a party to the CPUC proceedings. So, keep us updated. Let us know what's going on. Let us know when there's going to be service, when there's going to be wheelchair accessible vehicles available. And I was kind of like, are you kidding me? Like, they're supposed to be accessible now. If you go to San Francisco, they should be available from both Uber and Lyft, because we've seen offset requests in both of those from both organizations in those counties. And in Alameda County, people should at least be able to call an Uber. So that was just the most recent indication that this is an area that really needs a lot of focus from the TNCs and from this group. And so far, we haven't seen effective reporting of outreach efforts from the TNCs. There's lists of organizations contacted, but a lot of times it's just a single contact, like an email. There's not meaningful follow-up, and that doesn't work because when it comes to disability organizations, they tend to be really small. They tend to have really few resources and a lot of staff turnover. And they're tasked with a lot. They really have a lot on their plate relative to the staff and the resources they have. And so it doesn't work to reach out to them and say, okay, here's information about our wave service, please disseminate it for us. The organizations really need more engagement and more partnership than that. And that's something that we've seen the commission already recognize when the commission has asked TNCs, who are you partnering with? The word partnering is from the commission's decision, and how has the partnership publicized or promoted wave services? We've also seen that the reporting thus far has reflected really segregated efforts to reach people with disabilities. It's important to be targeting disability-specific organizations, but the outreach also needs to be integrated with the other efforts that transportation network companies do. So, for example, to the extent that transportation network companies are using billboards, ads, radio or internet ads, they should have a tagline that is, says, wheelchair accessible vehicles are available. Check out our website to find out more. Go on our app to find out more. Um, you know, Even aside from um, the TNC's general outreach efforts, there could be a message when you open the TNC's app saying, did you know we have wheelchair accessible vehicles accessible? If the TNCs are emailing users, there could be a tagline added to the emails. There's a lot that could be done to integrate outreach for very little resource investment by the TNCs that we haven't seen reflected in the reporting on outreach. And so because of all that, the disability advocates have proposed that the TNCs, that the commission required the TNCs to put together an annual outreach plan that has measurable goals and then more specific objectives and benchmarks on outreach to the disability community, and that takes into account underserved multi-ethnic communities in communities where English isn't the predominant language. And so that would be annual submission of a plan, and then quarterly reporting on the progress made on the plan with both tracking by the TNCs and quarterly reporting of specific data about the outreach in each geographic area, whether the outreach activities are accessible, to lay people, to people with limited English proficiency, to people with disabilities, what are the materials and are they accessible to those same groups, and then what are the outcomes, including what's the reach, so for example, if you're partnering with a disability organization, like what's the reach of that organization? If you're, putting a message out on the app every, when people open it, right? Like that's going to have a huge reach. But quantifying things like number of web page views, number of promotional codes that get used, those sort of really quantifiable things. I did want to add before I close that we reviewed the data collection proposals by the parties, and the proposals by CPED and San Francisco were highly consistent with a lot of the proposals that the disability advocates have put forward in the past regarding data collection. So for example, CPED is proposing zip code specific data, which is something that we've in the past urged the commission to do. And since I'm sitting here in Los Angeles, I'll use the example that Los Angeles County has 10 million people in it. That's more people than 40 US states. And, if the commission were the state commission of like Virginia or Wisconsin or Massachusetts, there's no way that they would ask for statewide data, right? Like it's just too many people. You'd break it down further, and it makes a lot of sense to do that here as well. Even if you just look at the geographic scope of LA, it's larger than Rhode Island and Delaware combined. So it makes sense to have more granular data. We also agree with CPED that pickups and drop-off complaints should be broken down, because those are areas that the disability advocates organizations hear complaints about. So thank you, and look forward to the rest of the workshop.
Thanks, Autumn. Does Melissa also want to say anything, or is that it from disability? Melissa, are you on?
I'm looking to see if she's on, and she may not have been able to join us yet, so we can go ahead and move on to San Francisco. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So Erin, let me pull up your presentation. Oops.
Thanks, Hannah. And thanks to the commission and staff for hosting the workshop this morning. Good morning. My name is Erin McAuliffe. I'm a principal planner with the Accessible Services Group of the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. I'm here to represent SFMTA as well as the San Francisco County Transportation Authority and San Francisco Mayor's Office on Disability. And I'm going to share more about the proposals we've submitted on Track 5B issues of the Access for All program, but given the limited time, my slides will focus mainly on the issues of Tnc data collection. Next slide, please. And first of all, complete and representative data are crucial for achieving the goal of the Access for All legislation, which is to ensure that TNCs do not discriminate against riders with disabilities, particularly riders who require wheelchair accessible vehicles. And the venues through which CPUC collects the relevant data, including the TNC annual reports and advice letters for requesting offsets and exemptions, these inform key benchmark analysis to determine if the program is effective and also determine the allocation of millions of dollars throughout the state. Therefore, the integrity of data included in the annual reports and the advice letters is incredibly important. Next slide. The Commission has logically directed staff to utilize the TNC annual reports to help inform the Access for All program. And this is reasonable as discrimination is based on whether a person with a disability can expect to receive the same level of service as someone who does not have a disability. And the TNC annual reports should be able to provide reliable data on this, not on these non-wave trips, to establish what that level of service is. And that's really critical to inform the benchmarks that ensure wave users are receiving continuously improved, reliable, and available service. In February, San Francisco and our County Transportation Authority was able to obtain and analyze the public versions of the 2020 TNC annual reports for both Lyft and Uber. As a note, Lyft's was incomplete with numerous required non-confidential fields withheld. This SFCTA's analysis revealed data integrity issues that have cross-cutting implications for the Access for All's annual benchmark report and possibly other TNC data reporting. One example is the reported number of total trip requests. The number of trip requests is an unambiguous data item. It is the combination of requests accepted and requests not accepted. And whether reported in the disaggregate or aggregated, the number it should be the same. However, both companies report different total numbers for that in 3 different sections of their annual reports. So for example, how many trip requests did Lyft receive? Was it 66 million, 91 million, or 116 million? We're not sure. The existence of these inconsistencies raises questions about reporting integrity for the annual report, as well as others, and the order of magnitude difference in Lyft's reporting was a red flag. Next slide, please. My colleagues at the TA were also perplexed by the completion rates that Lyft included in their annual report. On its face, Lyft's ride acceptance rate is erroneous. In 41 counties, they reported we never rejected a trip request during the 2020 report year. This includes Santa Clara, Sacramento, and Fresno counties. Similarly, nearly every zip code in San Diego has reported a 100% acceptance rate. So that raises questions for us about the reporting of trip completion rates in the Access for All advice letters as well. Next slide. Which brings me to the data integrity in the advice letters themselves. As has been acknowledged by the Track 5A proposed decision, Lyft incorporated pre-scheduled trips by including negative response times in 12 of their advice letter submittals, which is presumably every quarter for which they've submitted a request. By making up their own calculation for response times for these pre-scheduled trips, Lyft effectively skewed the data submitted to the Commission, misrepresenting response times for all wave trips and bringing down response times. And it's our understanding that the data submitted by Lyft has yet to be corrected to remove the pre-scheduled trips and adjust the incorrectly calculated response times. Next slide. There are also 2 general gaps in data integrity and reporting to acknowledge. The first is that given that TNCs selectively report wave data through the advice letter process, only when they're seeking offsets, the data do not show comprehensive statewide trends. There's no county for which both Uber and Lyft have reported data every quarter. Uber has actually only reported data every quarter in one county, which is Alameda. To go back to Autumn's question about why do people in Alameda not know about the service. Counties with the highest concentration of service, which are San Francisco and Los Angeles, are coming in and out of the data, making it impossible to truly see any trends statewide or by county over time. The second is that the public annual reports, in addition to not being complete, do not distinguish between wave and non-wave service or between requests for immediate dispatch versus pre-scheduled trips. Next slide, please. So it's incredibly important for CP to gather, verify, and utilize complete and correct data, because without doing that, we see questionable findings cited in the annual benchmark report. And the use of erroneous data in the annual benchmark report misleads the public on the effectiveness of the program and regulation. So a few findings in the annual benchmark report, which was released a few weeks ago, that lack support. For example, without recognizing the lack of correct response time data for Lyft, CPD cannot draw the conclusion like the vast majority of wave response times are within the required benchmarks. Without verifying the accuracy of how TNCs are reporting completed trip requests, there's also not much support for CPD to say Lyft's trip completion rate is twice Uber's. Without comprehensive statewide data, there's no support for CPD drawing conclusions such as there's wave availability and demand 24 hours a day, or that completed wave trip volume is stable and recovering despite COVID-19. And finally, since the annual reports do not distinguish wave and non-wave service, the public version of Lyft's data is incomplete, and it's unclear if there are also pre-scheduled or negative response issues in the annual report data. Without that sufficient and correct reporting in those reports, CPD cannot accurately claim they've calculated response times for the 50th percentile of all completed non-wave trips, which is important to setting that benchmark or grounding for what wave service should strive to be. The next slide, please. The last thing I wanted to talk about before we go into our proposals is the report also, it doesn't really look at the effectiveness of the program itself. It looks instead at whether or not TNCs are achieving current requirements. And like this, per the statute, the commission shall require each TNC to be accessible to persons with disabilities in order to be exempt. And the benchmark report's analysis concludes that neither Lyft nor Nomad met the exemption response time in the 10-quarter period covered by this report. This outcome suggests that exemption requirements are much more difficult to satisfy than offset requirements. We do not believe it's sufficient that an exemption is more difficult to satisfy than an offset if this program is going to meet the intent of the statute. And one thing the data do accurately tell us is that the current exemption requirements are not sufficient. In Riverside County, for example, Uber shockingly received an exemption, meaning they do not need to remit any access fees collected in that county for 1 full year after completing only 11 trips or 1% of trip requests. On this slide, there is a chart that displays that data that we've received in the advice letters to date. As a note, this chart is from San Francisco's TNC Access for All dashboards. And we created these dashboards using the data submitted in advice letters to present program information in a more legible manner for the public. And it's something we continue to urge the commission to take on because a finding like this was not readily obvious to us or anyone else without being able to use the dashboards to drill down and look at data from quarter to quarter and by county. Next slide, please. So as we've in our previous tracks, we continue to urge the commission to revise the annual reports to indicate whether each wave trip request and trip is each trip request and trip is wave or non-wave. 2, to require that TNCs report on all wave services in California, even if they're not requesting an offset or exemption. The list that the commission required in the last track, despite our suggestions, it's clearly not sufficient. We also recommend that the commission compile qualitative data, meaning feedback directly from riders and potential riders, in order to contextualize any trends in the qualitative data, such as one thing that was noted in the annual benchmark report was the high cancellation rates by passengers. I think qualitative feedback would really help to contextualize that. And 4, the thing we've also asked for before is the commission should maintain public dashboards displaying wave data. We just showed you the effectiveness of those dashboards and understanding the data a bit better, and that would also support the commission's environmental and social justice action plan goal to work towards more transparency of data information and provide tools and resources to facilitate analysis. We've also added 2 new recommendations to our presentation today, in addition to what we submitted in our initial proposal. And we did this after reviewing the annual reports of the annual benchmark report. First, we urge the Commission to audit data being provided by the TNCs in both the annual reports and the advice letters. It's clear there are numerous inconsistencies and clearly erroneous data in the annual report, and also reasons to suspect advice letter data may be corrupted as well. So erroneous data prevent the Commission from establishing accurate benchmarks from the Access for All program and seriously undermines other significant state and local policy development. We also believe Cped should withdraw the current annual benchmark report and reissue a corrected version with findings that more accurately reflect the limitations of the existing data and better analyzes how effective the program requirements have been in accomplishing the statute's goals. Next slide, please. I'll very high level go over our proposals in the next few slides because we do look forward to engaging more on this to develop more robust proposals. But for TNC community outreach, San Francisco echoes the disability advocates' concerns that community outreach has been insufficient. Currently, there's no connection between the quality of community outreach and whether a TNC is granted an offset or exemption, despite outreach being a statutory requirement. We support the disability advocates' proposal for CPUC to improve outreach by implementing a more detailed tracking and reporting system, which includes a mandatory annual outreach plan, quarterly reporting, and more meaningful engagement metrics. Next slide, please. Regarding multi-county pooling for counties with small funds, first, we just note that the term relatively small is somewhat subjective and a little bit arbitrary in this case. We believe local access fund administrators should be allowed to pool funds no matter the size of the fund if it will benefit their communities and they see a need. In addition, limiting multi-county pooling to only counties where the money is available small could prevent potentially very effective pooling of a program between a county with a small fund and a county with a large fund, but a shared service area or pool of writers. We believe these pooling arrangements should be voluntary, subject to the Commission's existing program requirements, but any additional terms negotiated and agreed to should be by the participating access fund administrators. And we also support the CPD proposal to allow transit agencies to apply as access fund administrators if other eligible entities do not apply. And finally, San Francisco doesn't have any specific proposals on how to administer the program after the proceeding closes in February 2023. And we look forward to hearing more from other parties, but to note there are quite a few large issues of importance that will need to be addressed, including any changes to offset and exemption requirements, what the reporting requirements are, requirements for the Access Fund program, disbursements of the Access Fund, and of course, auditing and compliance issues, which we believe will continue to be of high importance. Thank you. That concludes my presentation. We look forward to the conversation today.
Great. Thank you, Erin, and thank you to all the presenters. So that concludes the party's presentation. Let me switch over really quick. Great. So we will next move on to the public comments portion of the agenda. I want to note that the public comment should be focused on the topic scoped in the track 5B pertaining to data collection, TNC community outreach, multi-county pooling of funds, and commission staff authority delegation. So again, we will utilize the raise hand feature to field questions and comments. If you cannot use the raise hand feature or chat box, or cannot speak your questions or comments, you can verbally or you can email us at tncaccess@cpuc.ca.gov. The raise hand icon is located by clicking on the participant tab or the emoji icon at the bottom. So staff will monitor the raise hand feature and will unmute the individual selected. When called upon, please identify the organization you are affiliated with. After speaking, please lower your hand. I will leave it. I shall leave it here. So with that, I will open it up to see if anybody wants to make any public comments. Go ahead, Autumn.
Thanks. This is Autumn Elliott from Disability Rights California. And I guess I should have said in my introduction also that Disability Rights California has been making comments together with a couple of other organizations, Center for Accessible Technology and DREDF, the Disability Rights Education Defense Fund. And together we've been calling ourselves the Disability Advocates. My question is for Erin from San Francisco. The disability, and I guess I'll say generally, Erin, I thought your presentation was very effective and also very unsettling, and I hope was unsettling for other folks here as well, and that it leads to a number of changes in how the commission proceeds on these matters. But I wanted to specifically ask you about the data dashboard because the clarity of the data to the public has been something that the disability advocates have been concerned about for a long time. It's been, the way that the data is collected and reported publicly by the commission has made it really difficult, both for us and for members of the community to see what's going on. And so for that reason, we had previously urged the commission to itself create a data dashboard along the lines of what San Francisco created and post that on a public website. And that wasn't a suggestion that the commission adopted. So my question, Erin, is that do you think that if the commission wanted to revisit that decision, if the reason that the commission didn't do it before was because of, concerns about how difficult it would be or the resources it would take to put it together, do you think the fact that San Francisco has done the project and sort of learned and demonstrated how it could be done, do you think that would mean that if the commission wanted to do something along those lines, it would be cheaper and easier for them to do?
Sure, I can't speak on behalf of the commission, but I
Erin,
can.
sorry,
Oh, go
sorry
ahead,
to
Tara.
interrupt you. I just wanted to acknowledge that this particular segment of the agenda is we're really trying to make time for public comment. And I appreciate this question and discussion. I'd love to hear the answer. I just ask that we save this section for public comment, and the Q&A will follow this segment. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no problem. And sorry, I think I confused this section for the Q&A section. So I'm completely happy to have the question put forward to a different section if that's more appropriate.
Great, thank you. I'll make a note of it and make sure we return to that.
Sorry, everyone. I wasn't able to see anything in the chat box. So now if anybody want to include any messages in the chat box, I can now read it. Okay, so are there anybody else who would like to make public comments? We allocated 30 minutes, so we can always hop back on or just to make sure that the members of the public are able to make comments. So we don't hear anything now. So I guess what we can do is we can continue with the agenda items, and then we can always go back to this. And they'll also have an opportunity to respond to some of the questions or during the discussion portion of the agenda.
Anna, this is Tara. I have a suggestion. Why don't we take our, I think, was it 10 or 15-minute break? Let me just check here. Why don't we take our 15-minute break? And then if we come back and there are some hands raised, we can do public comments at that time and then get started back on our agenda at 10:30. How's that sound?
That sounds good.
Okay. So let's reconvene at 10:15. Give everyone a chance to digest all the presentations.
Okay, so I will pause the recording for now, and then I'll restart it when we get back around 10:15. Thank you, everyone. So now I'm going to go back to see if anybody has their hands raised for public comments. Seeing none. So we are now going to move on to part 1 of the open discussion portion of the agenda. We are about 30 minutes ahead of schedule. So depending on time, part 2 of the open discussion is supposed to happen after lunch. So we will just monitor to see where we're at. So let me go to the next slide. Okay, so the purpose of the open discussion is to enable robust dialogue with and among parties regarding Track 5B issues, as well as allow parties and the members of the public to seek clarifications of the proposals that were presented earlier. We've included questions from the scoping ruling to help facilitate today's discussion. I will read the questions in case people on the phone don't have access to the presentation in front of them. So just like the public comments, we will utilize the raise hand feature to help field questions and comments. If you cannot use the raise hand or chat box and cannot speak your question verbally, please email tncaccess@cpuc.ca.gov. The raise hand icon is again located by clicking on the participant tab or the emoji icon at the bottom. Staff will monitor the raise hand feature and will unmute the individual selected. When called upon, please identify the organization you are affiliated with. After speaking, please lower your hand. So I'm on slide 21. The first question is on Tnc Data Collection, which reads, what additional data should be collected from TNCs and access providers to inform the 2024 legislative report and potential modifications to the wave response time benchmarks? How can this data collection advance the goals of the Commission's Environmental and Social Justice Action Plan? So I'll now go ahead and open it up.
Autumn, I think it's a fair time for you to raise that question again, if you'd like to do so.
Yep, that sounds good. So my question for Erin was essentially does San Francisco have any opinion about whether, given the work that San Francisco's done with regard to the data dashboard, if the commission wanted to do something similar, would the fact that San Francisco has put this together make it easier or more efficient or cheaper for the commission to do something similar?
Right, so, oh, this is for Aaron, sorry.
I don't want to speak for commission staff, but in terms of making it easier, we did meet with staff to provide an overview of what we did, and we have documented everything that we've done to transform the data and make it usable in the dashboard. So we've done a lot of the footwork. That's not to say that whichever vendor or internal decisions they make or tools they have available to them would be exactly the same. We're using Tableau, and so I don't know exactly what they would use, but we have done a lot of the footwork to understand what's needed. So I do think it'd be a little bit easier. I don't know about cheaper. We did partner with a pro bono through a program that provided pro bono assistance, and it took us about 3 months working a few hours a week.
Great, thank you.
Adam, you have your hand raised?
Yes, I had a clarification question for CPED staff on the proposal. Is this an appropriate time to ask?
Yes.
So one of the points that you all made in the proposal was, that you can look at wave service availability in a 24-hour time frame, but the current data does not provide the number of waves available at certain times of the day. And I just want to make sure I'm understanding the point there, because the data is reported by hour of the day and day of the week. So I guess my question is, how would reporting the non-offset counties give more information about, like wave availability in an offset county? If that makes sense. If it doesn't, I can try another way. I didn't understand the rationale in CPD's proposal for why non-offset county data around unique waves would give greater information about wave availability in offset counties.
Because I think holistically, we want to know where wave is available, not just for offset counties. So that's why we want data available for counties not seeking offsets.
Yeah, I think the broader point is, I think you cited that statement about certain times of day. Without a comprehensive understanding of where wave is being provided across California, whether or not it's an offset county, and I think this was acknowledged in some of the previous presentations as well. It's we don't know what the statewide situation is, and an example of that is we don't know statewide how many vehicles are available at certain times of day in any county where you've started operations.
Okay, got it. I figured that was the case, but I wanted to clarify that. I guess on that point, Anna, if I could just proceed with another comment on this topic. We've put it in our comments, and we probably will again, but the participation in the offset and the exemption program obviously is an optional thing for TNC providers. I'm not talking about the Access for All program in general. I'm just talking about applying for offsets. And so what would happen if in a given quarter Uber doesn't qualify in any county, so it doesn't seek an offset? Wouldn't there be a kind of a hole in the reporting? there are currently holes where we don't apply, but what would happen in a county where, we don't apply, which is very possible, under the track 4 benchmarks? How would the data be handled in that situation?
Are you asking whether the data submitted for counties where you're not seeking an offset has any bearing on the offset determination?
No, I guess I'm saying, so if the data is collected for all counties, whether we're applying for offset or not applying for an offset, but in a given quarter, one quarter, we decide we're not applying for offsets at all, so we don't submit an advice letter.
I see.
How would CPED then have the data from that quarter? They wouldn't, right?
That's a fair question, but I think maybe this is something that would need to be resolved in the course of this track 5. If that scenario played out, would TNCs who have, say, previously received offsets or some other condition be required to continue reporting the information so that there's an ongoing sort of track record of where the availability is? I'm just posing that as a question and an example, but it's a good point. I think that would need some clarification in the course of deciding on track 5 issues.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, it's just, I guess our broader point is going to be that applying for offsets and whatever reporting is required to do so is, an optional thing that TNCs can pursue or not pursue. And so we believe it would be appropriate that the reporting be limited to where we're applying for offsets, given that, it's TNC's prerogative as to whether they're going to seek an offset or an exemption in a given county, in a given quarter.
Got it. I understand.
Autumn, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to respond to that comment. It is the TNC's prerogative whether or not to apply for offsets in any particular quarter for any particular county, but it isn't their prerogative to decide whether or not to have accessible service. The legal obligation to provide accessible service to people with disabilities is there and has always been there under both federal and California state law. The part that's optional is whether or not TNCs want to use the access for all funds in order to offset the costs of making their services accessible. That's the portion of it that's optional. They can do that or they cannot, or they can use that as a tool to help them themselves become accessible, or they can choose to become accessible another way. But becoming accessible itself is not an option, it's a requirement. And so it is very much appropriate for the commission to gather the data it needs to understand what is the level of accessibility that's happening in TNC services so that it can fulfill its statutory duty to implement this program and report back to the legislature and to the people of California what the state of matters are and how successful this program has been, so that the legislature and the people, when this program sunsets, the legislature and the people going forward know, what needs to be done next in order to ensure that the services are accessible to people with disabilities.
Erin, I think you have your hand up.
Thanks, Anna. I wanted to, go to Adam's point first of all, everything Autumn said, I support and agree with. And to Adam's point about, the access for all offsets are optional. That's true. The commission does require regular reporting on TNC services, and Wave service is still a TNC service, which is why San Francisco continues to harp on this gap in data collection with the annual reports, where the commission's requiring information on the trips provided in California, but there's no way to distinguish between Wave, whether it's a Wave request or trip or not. And, while we would love to, we also think it's important to see quarter by quarter progress across the state for analysis purposes, but like there is, and I know it's complicated because there's two separate tracks at the moment with the access for all and the general TNC rulemaking, but this is a gap that keeps coming up over and over again. And I think it's something that's worth CPD and staff and the commission considering, especially in this track right now, where we're like trying to clean things up. That's like the most obvious place for us to understand for reporting on all trips and for distinguishing between whether it's a Wave or non-Wave trip. And previously, the accessibility plans were supposed to, the accessibility reporting was supposed to show how many accessible trips TNCs were reporting, but they were using accessible to mean we're not sure. They didn't have any wheelchair accessible vehicles were reporting that they're providing accessible trips. So there's a lot of cleanup that needs to happen, and it's not just in this specific track, but it really has a lot of bearing on the rulemaking here.
Thanks, Erin. So any other comments or follow-up questions on this topic? Okay, I don't see anybody. In case I don't see anybody, go ahead and unmute your phone and you can speak up now. Okay, so hearing none, we will move on to the next question on TNC community outreach. And it reads, how should the commission ensure that TNCs undertake effective engagement with the disability communities to further acceptance and expansion of on-demand Wave service? Are there any questions, clarifications, or comments to this question? Tara, go ahead.
Thanks, Anna. I have a question to clarify some of the Disability Rights California proposal. Autumn, the proposal that you put forth included, I believe, a suggestion to specify more specific data points to define what is happening with TNC's community outreach efforts and maybe how it's working. And I was wondering if you could go any further to explain what, from your perspective, would there be benchmarks, and what would be appropriate benchmarks associated with those metrics? Mostly I'm looking for information on how you would propose staff evaluate that kind of submittal.
Sure. So I think, there's sort of two ways you'd be looking at it. One would be sort of the overall scope of the plan, right? Like, does it include outreach to disability organizations? Does it include integration of information about the Waves availability of Wave service into the TNC's like standard outreach and advertising? Is there an integrated people's use of the app? So you'd be looking at the scope, but then also, you can look for sort of very concrete, like, if part of the plan is a website, like how many views are there of the website? If part of the plan is using promotional codes for Wave rides, then how many of those get distributed? How many of those get used? Are they distributed statewide? Is there, is there other measures in place to ensure that um, those are accessible and reachable by underserved communities, including communities where there's limited English proficiency or, other underserved populations. So I think in evaluating the plan, there would be an evaluation of, sort of both the scope, like how far is it reaching, and then, what are the metrics, and then with the quarterly reporting, you'd be looking for the extent there's compliance with the annual plan. And part of the advantage of the annual plan is it gives, within those parameters, it gives the TNCs some leeway to figure out, like, what makes sense with respect to their particular program, and where, like, what efforts they want to make. Um, so I'll leave it at that.
Got it. So if I understood you correctly, the plan obviously forward-looking and gives TNCs discretion to define those activities as they see fit. In your mind, is the framework that the TNC also proposes the metrics that can be used to track according to what strategies they propose, or would you recommend that the commission actually set some benchmarks on predefined outreach metrics?
So I think the commission could do both. Could set forward, so could set forth. So, for example, right, like, if you're using a website, we want to hear about page per views, if you're, et cetera. Like, I think there's a lot of guidance that the commission can put forward to the TNCs in developing the plan. And then the TNCs themselves, again, within the parameters and within the guidance, can design a plan that makes sense for commission approval. It's an approach that gets used in other contexts. So, for example, housing providers who are offering affordable housing to the community typically will have to present to the funding agency um, an outreach plan for how they're going to advertise the availability of affordable housing units, and the steps that they're taking to ensure that the availability of the housing gets out to underserved communities, that the outreach plan is accessible to people with disabilities, and so forth. So, it's not a check the box, like, as long as you come up with something and put it forward, it gets approved. There, the entity puts forward detailed guidance about the scope that they're looking for and the parameters, and ways that the that the housing providers can use, and then they review the plans carefully to ensure that they're meeting that. But it's not, and you must do like X, Y, and Z, and like there is some leeway for the provider to use their own expertise.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification and example.
Adam, go ahead.
I just make a quick point that I think we would urge that the commission adopt pretty clear guidelines for outreach that give certainty to a TNC for what will or will not be deemed sufficient outreach. Especially as we plan out the year, we'll want to know kind of what the expectation is ahead of time. And then I think the second point is if each TNC's outreach plan is going to need to be approved by the commission, I think that's a pretty unwieldy and lengthy process. So our strong preference would be that we're able to come up with, what the quantitative and qualitative requirements are for all TNCs here in this rulemaking, that TNCs can then use as a blueprint for conducting their outreach.
This is Autumn. We agree with the first comment that the more guidance that the commission can give to TNCs, the better. And we also, with regard to the second point, we also agree that the more we can flesh this out in this proceeding, the better. And so to the extent that the TNCs themselves have ideas for things that would work for them and, what types of benchmarks they would propose. I think that would all be really helpful because my guess would be that the TNCs are very thoughtful and data-driven about the outreach and advertising that they do with regard to their service generally and with regard to things like driver recruitment. And so it would be helpful if that kind of thoughtfulness was also brought to bear with respect to the wheelchair accessible vehicle services. And, so I think that will be a helpful part of the conversation.
Okay, Adam, do you have any follow-up?
No, I think it's a fair point, and we'll work to try to put as much meat on the bone in our comments to the proposals and try to think through, what could work on our end. We somewhat wanted to defer to the disability advocates first, given that this is not our area of expertise, but I think it's a good action item for our team to think about how we can do it. The other thought that we had was, potentially maybe a greater role for the commission and commission staff in sort of maybe acting as a clearinghouse for the organizations that exist in the state of California and, kind of being a central resource for TNCs that disability advocates could provide input on, like a place that we could go that's kind of a source of truth for all the organizations that are out there. I think we have an imperfect way of identifying potential organizations to do outreach to and to partner with. And, if there was a central effort, kind of led by the commission, I think that would be very helpful for TNCs.
This is Autumn. I think what I would love to hear from the TNCs also is what's the capacity to do to sort of build on what the TNCs already have. So, what's the capacity to do in-app notification or information? Do the TNCs ever send like emails out to their users? And, if so, what's the capacity to add taglines to that sort of thing? Like, that would be helpful information in fleshing all this out.
So I won't be able to give a lot of substance with regard to our technical abilities. I know that we do make our Wave offering available in certain places on the website and in the help pages and stuff like that. As far as our further functionality, I don't have that information now, but it's something that we can circle back on.
That sounds great.
And I also would like to provide a response on behalf of Lyft to your question, Autumn. This is Janae Weaver from Lyft Compliance Council. I too cannot speak to the engineering capabilities of our app and what we would be able to do with our app as far as informing users of Wave. We also have information on our website. We also have information in our blog, as well as I know that we do campaigns that involve our social media. So we are getting the word out, not to mention that we do have the face-to-face interaction with various organizations as we outline in our offset request. But that's something that we can definitely outline further, the efforts that we have done in our comments.
Thanks.
Erin, did you want to comment?
Yeah, so a few things. What seems clear to me is that the commission can set at least a few really clear expectations. Like for one is expectations of how the TNC should be marketing or making known that they have Wave services, and for one that is if Wave services are clearly and readily available in the app. It's still not clear to me if Lyft has fixed their app so that anyone who opens it can request a Wave without knowing that you have to do some back-end customization in terms of like applying, like setting the tab for access. And other really simple things like, do they have a publicly available website with their program and information on service areas, fares, etc. And what I'm hearing is the disability advocates, obviously have deep knowledge of the disability community in terms of communities that TNC should be reaching out to, and some guidance on sort of like methods or approaches that are including disability sensitivity, et cetera, that could be really helpful to the TNCs. But I appreciated Adam's comments about Uber thinking through it more in terms of what they can do and what they're capable of, because I do think both Uber and Lyft, the TNCs, do have a lot of great knowledge on some of the things we haven't discussed, like how do you actually measure the outcomes of the engagement. And with regards to standard TNC service and service for people with disabilities, like there's not that much difference there in terms of how do these companies understand if their marketing is effective, like how do they measure uptake of their services. I think that there's a lot of room for them to provide more information and expertise on how we understand the outcomes, and not just the piece that the disability advocates have already really clearly outlined in terms of what kind of outreach is acceptable or encouraged.
Thanks, Erin. Janae, did you want to respond to that Erin's question about whether or not the app has been updated?
Unfortunately, I do not have an update, but that's something that I can provide to you directly, Erin, if not address it in our comments.
Thanks. I know we've asked it a few times before in previous tracks, and it's not just for my edification. It's something that I think is really vital to the success of your program and, adhering to the legislation. So it'd be great if it could be made publicly available, not just to San Francisco, but to CPD staff. Honestly, anyone on the service list. This is a longstanding question, and I think it's really important.
I will go ahead and I'll address it in our comments then.
Thanks.
So I just want to make a quick question or a question for everyone. If the TNCs feel that these outreach is more than, or it's a huge undertaking for sure, but if they believe that the current 10 cents collection access fee is not enough and we have to increase it, what does everybody feel about that? Autumn?
We would support that.
I would definitely want to address that question in our comments. But I do want to ask as far as having access fees left over. Do we have access fees left over?
We do. So any of the access fees that are left after the offsets, it goes to the local access, not local access, but it goes into it's available for the local access fund administrators and the statewide access fund administrators to develop the WAVE programs, and that is posted on the website.
So could we potentially tap into those funds to support marketing efforts?
That I'll have to.
San Francisco wants to comment on that because I know Lyft included a lot in their proposal on how the commission should provide additional funding for things like marketing, and it just seemed completely unreasonable. I think that's part of what we're talking about right now. It's part of the offset and exemption requirements, and so you're already including line items for marketing and outreach, and receiving offsets for that. So I think Anna's question is maybe prompted by that, saying, are the access fees not enough? It feels weird completely unreasonable to establish a separate pot of monies that are not within the current program structure. Like, you have an opportunity to be reimbursed for your marketing.
Correct. And if we want to look at us doing additional marketing, and not only us, but TNCs as a whole, I mean, that would take, additional resources, additional materials, and there's a cost associated with that. And so if there are access funds that are left over that we could potentially use to support those additional efforts, then I think that's something we should look at.
Well, I guess I'm trying to understand are you saying there's not enough? Are you not collecting enough fees to offset your current costs, even though you're being awarded offsets?
Well, that's something that I think we would want to explore further in collaboration with the CPED. I'm looking at, and TNCs as a whole, looking at what we're doing, how we're requesting the offset, and is that enough? And if it's not enough, where could those funds come from? Which is exactly, kind of what Anna is alluding to. But we do think that, marketing efforts, you could never have enough, right? And so it's just a matter of resources.
I guess I'm still unclear. Are you saying that if you're currently including requests for offsets for marketing expenses, are you saying that there's not enough money in the access fund for your requests? And that's why you're not doing more marketing?
I'm saying that looking at the marketing that we could do in the future, if you are saying that we are not doing enough, because we're coming at this that we are doing good marketing, but we're definitely open to doing more marketing. And if so, we would need funds to be able to do that. And so if we're unable to pull from the offset to receive additional funding, and if there's not enough money within that, then we need to look outside of that. And that's something that we
I feel like we're talking in circles because there is an access fund you're requesting offsets from.
Correct.
Are you saying that there is not enough money in the fund currently to provide offsets for your desired marketing expenses?
I think you could find funding with it, that there would be funds within the fund. However, if Anna is proposing that we need to increase the 10% tax, my question is why? Why would we need to increase that if we have funds and leftover funds are given to the local chapters?
I want to step in just briefly here. I don't think that we're putting forth a proposal at this point of raising the fee. It's merely a question. So this is helpful dialogue to understand. Secondly, the unused or available funds that you're referring to are not, they're not, how should I say, they're not just free and available for anything that needs to get used. They are assigned to particular counties. And I think as many people in this workshop are aware, a statewide fund administrator hasn't been identified yet. So any of those counties that haven't come forth with a local administrator still have funds available to them, and through the program rules would have first access to that. So we can look into this further from a legal perspective, but I think it would be helpful in follow-up comments on the workshop to understand parties' perspectives on the fee, especially as it relates to this community outreach requirement.
Hey, this is Joe Castiglione from San Francisco County Transportation Authority. I don't want to, kind of beat something that has already, we're going to move on from. Tara, I want to acknowledge, like, I think it's interesting to ask this as a question, but honestly, this should, if the commission or others want to put this forth as a proposal, we should do that within, the track. From my perspective, this represents a quite significant shift in how the program has been designed and implemented up to this point, and is quite inconsistent on a number of fronts with the existing kind of program structure. As you alluded to just a moment ago, it would have potentially significant implications for example, the role and opportunities that local access fund administrators may have. With respect to the state access fund administrator, as I understand it, even that program is still required to, under the current guidelines, to expend those funds in the county in which they're collected. So this SAFA, I don't know how you say it, it does not go into like a giant statewide, fund. I think that I guess I'm a little bit concerned about language that says, there can never be enough dollars for marketing. The logical extension of that is that we should just pour all the monies into the TNCs and their marketing campaigns, even though we see examples, in my mind, quite egregious examples, like Erin demonstrated earlier, where exemptions for counties that might collect in the millions of dollars of fees being collected, receiving exemptions, which essentially means that there's, a bit of a blank check. There's no remittance on any of that for delivering something like 11 trips. That's, already the program is fraught. Suggesting that we're going to just plow more money into marketing efforts because you can never have enough seems like a tremendously bad idea. And then finally, just by way of clarification, it's not a 10% tax. It's a 10-cent fee per ride. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. I just have one clarification question for you at the beginning. I think you said this would be a significant shift, and I just wanted to make sure I understand what you're referring to there. The idea of opening up unallocated funds for additional marketing is what you're saying would be a significant shift. Is that, did I understand you correctly? Okay.
Yes, you did. I mean, because as I understand it, even if in a given county, well, first of all, the funds are attached to a county, right? Whether there's a local fund administrator or a state fund administrator, those funds have to be associated with improvements in that county, right? Because it's those counties' ride users that are generating those fees, right? So this would, yes, this would represent a very significant change, not only because it's entirely undefined as to what this marketing fund would be, but it just there is already very explicit. And for example, if those funds, if no fund administrator exists to contract with access providers, those funds, as I understand it, stay in that county's pot and roll over to the next year. So there's still be, to pull this thread just also begs all sorts of questions. And I really think the answers to some of those questions, many of the participants and parties to this proceeding would find deeply problematic.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I think we would agree that would be a significant shift, especially just from an implementation standpoint, and all the other issues you raised. And I'll turn it back to you. It looks like we have a couple other hands up.
Yeah, so Annette.
Yeah. Can you hear me? This is Annette Williams, also from San Francisco, SFMTA. I just wanted to remark, to back up a little bit and say, really the best marketing tool is to have very good service. If the service is working well, wheelchair users, when they try to get a trip, are able to get it quickly and easily, that will be the best marketing that any TNC could do. Not to say that other marketing isn't important, but I think concentrating on providing a good service in all of these counties would be the best thing and the best use of resources. So I just want to make sure we don't lose sight of, actually, when you have good service, people talk to each other. Word of mouth is about one of your best marketing. And I'm sure the TNCs know that from their other services. When things work well, people use them. So I just don't want to lose sight of that.
Thanks, Annette. Adam?
Yeah, I'm really glad Annette brought up that point, because I was going to make the point that in some counties our expenses exceed the fees that we collect. So we're capped by the fees that we collect. And so in some counties you might have a situation where if the outreach requirements are time and resource consuming enough, it might come at the expense of the money that we can provide to subsidize and contract with wave fleet providers. So you could see a situation where we're needing to choose between those two expenses in terms of what we get reimbursed for. So that is a possibility. And then, again, I think I mentioned, like, the track 4 requirements introduce new requirements that we may not be able to meet all the time. And so these expenses, very well could be coming out of pocket for us in many counties, in many quarters. And that point is really to the fee, the per trip fee question. I don't think we have an opinion about it right now, but it's just a consideration that, we are sometimes capped by the fees that we collect. And so, we have to make budget choices based on that.
Autumn?
Thanks. I think from the disability advocates' perspective, all of these comments point in the direction of increasing the per trip fee. Our initial research at the very beginning of this proceeding was that a lot of jurisdictions had higher per trip fees. And I think the commission's approach was, let's, as an initial matter, set the per trip fee at the lower end, with the idea of it being kind of a more conservative approach. And, let's see if 10 cents a ride is sufficient. And then if it's not, it can always get raised. And perhaps that is what the data is suggesting, is that now may be the time to raise the per trip fee.
Right. Thank you, everyone. It was just a question that I kind of thought about. So, I mean, it would be good if the parties can include them in their comments too, so that it'll be on the record. Anybody else that would like to make a comment either about the 10 cents fee or about the TNC community outreach? Okay, hearing none. It is 11 o'clock. There's 2 more questions and I've allotted like 30 minutes each. So why don't we just go ahead and do that? How does that sound with everybody? Is that okay? Okay. So we'll go ahead and okay, sorry. Okay, so I'm slide 26. So the first question, or the third question, is on the issue of multi-county pooling of funds, which reads, for counties where the amount of access fund monies available is relatively small, should access fund monies be permitted to be pooled across multiple counties? If so, what criteria should be used to determine multi-county pooling? What other requirements should be considered? Should the commission allow fund pooling only in counties served by the statewide fund administrator, only in counties served by individual local access fund administrator, or both? Anybody have any comments, additional comments, or clarification on the proposal, on the proposals that were presented today? Tara, go ahead.
Thanks, Anna. I had a question for, I believe this was San Francisco. In your proposal, I think you wanted to limit the allowance of pooling of funds to the local fund administrators, but I think to leave undecided the question of whether the statewide fund administrator could also pool funds across counties. I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly, or rather, were you recommending against the statewide being able to pool funding in that manner?
I think the former, just leaving undecided. We don't know anything about the statewide fund administrator yet, or what their expertise or knowledge of the different counties is, or how they would plan to make the determination about, how funds should be pooled or not. I think that would require a more specific proposal for us to be able to react to.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Are there any MPOs, RTPs?
Could I just follow up on that a little bit? This is Annette Williams. I think from my perspective, I would want to make sure if the statewide is looking at that's something the counties agree to, because the counties are the funds are supposed to be distributed on a countywide basis. So I would think it would be important to be engaging with the counties and making that decision if they're going to pool funds, or if funds are going to be pooled for those counties. But like Aaron said, we don't have a proposal to respond to. But I think it would, the whole legislation seems, it's clear that the counties, that these kinds of decisions should be made on a local level where there's the best understanding of what's needed in that county.
Yeah, to your point, Annette, our proposal recommended that those counties that do wish to pool together develop an MOU so that it's clear it's locally driven and locally agreed to.
Yeah, so my point is just if it's, if a state administrator is making that decision, that the local counties are, agreeing that that makes sense for their counties for those funds to be pooled. So it's not happening at a level above them.
Got it. Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Are there any other comments? Are there any transit planning agencies online that would like to give any comments about pooling of funds? I don't see anything, nothing in the chat box either. So, okay. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next scoping question. The next question reads, should commission staff be delegated authority to make decisions on certain aspects of the Access for All program once the proceeding has closed? If so, which issues? So I'm now going to open it up. If anybody wants to make any comments or clarifications to the presentations.
Anna, this is Erin. I guess it would be really helpful for us to hear from the commission sort of within your framework and rules of practice and procedure, like what are the options? And how does it, if staff were to be delegated authority to make decisions, how would the public and parties have an opportunity to comment or provide feedback? Because there are some really large, important topics in place of a formal proceeding with comments and the different tracks. Sort of what would that look like and what options would we all have?
Erin, I think I will take from your question also a recommendation that for especially certain types of decisions, which I think you did outline in your proposal, that San Francisco believes there should, the opportunity for the public and parties to weigh in should be maintained. I think we might want to take this question back internally and speak with our judge to better, to more accurately describe what how those rules would apply with different options of making decisions after a proceeding closes. I think there are several, but I don't think I'm prepared to describe them very accurately right now. So let us take that back and provide some more information after the workshop.
Great, that would be incredibly helpful. And if we're thinking about it in terms of being able to make comments on the workshop and proposals, is there an opportunity, depending on when that information is made available, to either postpone the filing deadline for the comments or just better incorporate that information into the record so that we have more time, enough time to think it through and comment on it?
Yeah, we can talk about that with the judge as well. While we're on this topic, are there particular topical areas where you believe staff should not be delegated the authority to make decisions?
I think that really depends on the process. Once, if staff is making a recommendation, like in a resolution, and then parties have the opportunity to comment on that, that might be sufficient. It's really unclear to me, sort of the process, and I know I respect and appreciate the commission is very process oriented. So I just want to make sure that any recommendations or proposals we make are within that framework, and that we're fully understanding what we're saying and what you're expecting.
Great. Okay.
Okay, so are there any other questions? We'll be sure to clarify with the judge and then get back to everybody in order for you guys to make comments about that. Are there any other questions? Okay, so I guess before we conclude today's workshop,
Anna,
I want to.
Annette
Annette
just raised her hand.
Sorry, thank you.
I just had one question, related to what Erin relayed in her presentation, which is that at least it's our understanding that a few exemptions have been granted for counties where there were very, very low trip counts. And I believe that that's based on the fact that offsets in the early stages of the proceeding were being granted based just on trips that were completed and not including trips, having any kind of completion rate, meaning a percentage of trips that must be completed. And now, the benchmarks include that. But I think that that's a huge glaring problem, that there are funds that are being retained by the TNCs when there's very low trip that are happening. And Erin pointed out Riverside County, where there was only 11 trips. So I think that needs to be looked at, and that there's a big glaring question on whether that should have been the case, and it should be corrected.
And then, Annette, is there also a suggestion there that that is one such issue for which staff should not be delegated authority to make decisions?
Exactly, but it's just an example of something we don't want to have happen, right? And so we need to make sure that that is not something that happens in the future. And I think we brought it up in our comments that we had great concerns. And as you know, we also believe it should be 80% of trips, not 50% of trips, which are the benchmarks for the percentage of completed trips, for offsets. And I think in San Francisco, it only goes up to 61% after the 4 quarters. But to have there be no completion rate whatsoever, and to have that small number of trips taking place and then funds being retained under an exemption is not, I think, the intention of the legislation.
I was just thinking about what you were saying, Annette. This was brought up in track 2 when the benchmarks were put forth. And so I guess my question is, why wasn't it brought up then? And yet I think that's why it's being improved upon track after track. So we can definitely say that the exemption standards have definitely been more stringent. But to go back and to say, basically the standards that we have put in track 2 are not, I can't say reasonable, but they're not consistent with the statute. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we've been very clear all along from the very beginning that just having offsets or exemptions be based only on response times when you're not looking at the percentage of trips that are completed was not reasonable. And we've been clear on that from the very beginning. So that our comments on that have not changed. And I believe that disability rights advocates, submitted a rehearing request, related to this issue too. But I just think it's an example of something. My understanding was that, you would be using the new benchmarks when you decided on exemptions, and that exemptions would not be based on quarters prior to having the benchmarks in place that included completed trips. So I was very shocked to see that that did happen. Because obviously we all know if trips are not, if you have 10 or 11 trips being completed, you are not meeting the needs of that community or that county. Anyone could say that's clear, and you should not be getting an exemption.
I think I saw Adam had his hand raised as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that we applied for the exemptions, before there was a track 3 decision. We applied in October of 2020. So we, set forth everything that the track 2 decision required us to set forth. And moving forward, we have new policies and new rules that we have to follow for exemptions. So, we were following the rules in track 2, and we'll follow the rules, moving forward as they're set out in the track 4 and track 5 rules.
I just wanted to. Oh,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Erin.
I just wanted to say I think Autumn and the disability advocates laid out very clearly in their request for rehearing why the track 2 decision was an error. There was also multiple letters of support requesting a rehearing to address this oversight from Los Angeles, San Francisco, Marin County. And I don't know if there's been an update on that request. It sounds like from your question, Anna, that the commission's decided not to consider addressing that error. Is that the case?
It's still pending. So yeah, I don't have any update on that.
Okay. And just in response to your comment about track 2, I want to be incredibly clear with everybody here. It was never our understanding from track 2 that the commission was setting an exemption requirement that was just not in line with the clear language of the statute, which says 80% of requested trips.
Thanks, Erin. Autumn? Autumn, if you're speaking, you are on mute.
Sorry about that. Mostly had the same comments and questions as Erin about the request for rehearing. Since it's been pending for a while, my recollection of it isn't perfect, but I thought that we had addressed in the document sort of what happened in track 2, and inconsistency with the statute is inconsistency with the statute. There's no, if you didn't bring it up in track 2, it's now waived exemption to the rule that the commission needs to follow the statute when it's implementing this program. But I thought we had also sort of explained the chronology of how the questions were phrased in the scoping memo and the responses, and sort of why things happened as they did.
Okay. Thank you, Autumn. There any other comments? Questions? Okay, so hearing none. So before we conclude today's workshop, I want to bring to your attention the track 5B schedule of what's coming up next. Comments on proposals on today's workshop will be due on May 16th. Reply comments on the opening comments will be due May 27th. And the PD on the Track 5B issues will be released sometime in Q3 of this year. And there are any questions about the schedule? Go ahead, Erin.
Just to bring it back to the issue of staff delegation and the judge providing more clarity, just hoping that my request is heard, and depending on the timing of when we receive that information, that the schedule could potentially be modified.
Yes, of course. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, that concludes today's workshop. We hope you find today's workshop to be informative. We look forward to the comments and reply comments in a few weeks. And you'll be hearing from us definitely regarding the follow-up questions on the staff delegation. And this concludes our workshop. Thank you again. Yes.
It's
Commissioner.
Judy. Thanks. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. It was a very good discussion. And of course, I want to encourage folks to provide your usual, very detailed comments by the May 16th deadline. And then, of course, the reply comments, as Anna has outlined, by May 27th. I'm very appreciative that folks would like to have insights to the commission's processes, what happens when a proceeding closes, what happens in the various types of advice letters, and the ability to comment on proposals and what have you. So we will look to provide some clarification on all of that early on. Thank you, and thank you to Tara, Anna, and the CPED team.
Thank you, Commissioner. So this concludes our workshop. Thank you again for participating. I will now stop the recording.
Have a good